So, good morning, everyone. I am Katarzyna Baran, and I represent the Rector's Office. And I'm very privileged this day to welcome to the inaugural Rector's debate. And our honored guest is His Excellency Arndt Freytag von Loringhoven, the Germany's ambassador to Poland, who represents the government of Federal Republic of Germany. So please welcome. With his wife, Barbara von Freytag. So please welcome too. And I also welcome the host of today's meeting, the rector of Krakow University of Economics, the Professor Stanisław Mazur. And now I would like to ask Mr. Rector to officially opening the meeting. Thank you.
Your Excellency, Mr. Ambassador, I feel privileged to welcome you at our university and your wife. I also would like to welcome our dear and distinguished guests. And Filip Horvat, General Counsel of Austria in Krakow. Please applause. Sergei Linevich, the General Counsel of Russia Federation in Krakow. Marta Ritech-Sekulic, the General Counsel of Hungary in Krakow, the Council's first secretary. Mallory Lavor, representative of Consulate General of the Republic of France in Krakow. Professor Dr. Jarosław Górniak, Vice Rector for Development of the Jagiellonian University. Professor Jerzy Zając, Vice Rector for Education and International Relations of Krakow Polytechnic. Andrzej Tombiński, the Chief Executive Officer of Rebał company. I also would like to welcome Professor Jacek Purchla, the professor of our university, and people and the men who invested a lot of time and energy to build strong, good relation our country with, our neighbors. I am also privileged to welcome those of you who are attending here in person in this lecture, and those who have decided to join us online. Hearty welcome to all of you, and thank you very much for being here this morning. Please give a round of applause to all of the participants in this event. Okay. Now let me introduce our honorable speaker, Mr. Ambassador Arndt Freytag von Loringhoven, Germany's ambassador to Poland. He was born in 1956, more than 11 years after the war. He has served as deputy head of Germany's Federal Intelligence Service and the Germany's ambassador to the Czech Republic. He became NATO's first chief of intelligence in 2006. In one of his speeches, Ambassador Freytag von Loringhoven noticed that Polish-German relations were full of opportunities and challenges, noting that the two countries were joined by 1,000-year history featuring both high points as well tragic past, in which many of your forebears become victims and cruel crimes committed by our forebears. He continued in this speech, "We are also connected by an unprecedented path of reunification and prosperous multifaceted cooperation today. It's difficult not to agree with such opinion. I am firmly convinced that Mr. Ambassador is an experienced diplomat who has worked all his professional life for a close and trust cooperation with Poland. Among contemporary challenges, Mr. Ambassador, in one of his another interview, pointed out were climate change, digitalization, mobility, energy sources, scientific research, and innovation. To meet this strong partnership, to meet these challenges, strong partnership and genuine will of cooperation are needed. And I do believe that in our relation, I mean about Germany and Poland, such values are very deeply rooted and constitute a great base for carrying out this type of partnership. Mr. Ambassador, once again, we are very pleased to have you here, and now I would like to ask you to present your speech, so the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you so much for your cordial welcome and for your great interest here. And yes, I will give a speech, and then I hope we can have a dialogue afterwards. And I'm happy to answer your questions or discuss certain issues that I will raise. So I named my speech Contemporary Issues or Questions in Bilateral Relations. I would have it in 2 and 3 parts, a short introduction about the foundations of our relations as they are today, and then an analysis, a description of where we are, and then some ideas about what we can do better in the future. And there I would like to address the challenges and also the great opportunities that exist to my mind. So starting with the foundations, this is a year in which we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Treaty of Partnership and Friendship between Germany and Poland. It was signed on the 16th of June, 1991, and 30 years later, our federal president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, came to Warsaw, had a meeting with President Duda to celebrate this signing of the treaty. I want to start with that because I think this is a really comprehensive treaty that spans the entirety of our relationship, and of course a lot of it has been consumed over the years, but it still provides an excellent foundation for the future. And I'm not going to run through this treaty with you now, but one of the important things it contains is the commitment of Germany to support Polish accession to the European Union, which was, of course, realized then in 2004. So a very strong commitment that was actually part of our policy right from the start in 1989, very strongly promoted by the then Chancellor Helmut Kohl. It also goes through economic cooperation, scientific and technical cooperation, and it founded a number of institutions that are extremely important still today. One of them is the Foundation for German-Polish Cooperation, which has funded innumerable bilateral projects over the years, and still does. So wherever you go, you can find the traces of this very important institution. And another one is the German-Polish Youth body, Deutsch-Polnisches Jugendwerk, which also has been extremely active over the years. Another important part in this treaty was the minorities on both sides. We have minorities. We have a German minority here in Poland and a Polish minority, Polonia, in Germany, and it commits both sides to support for cultural matters and mainly language tuition, either side. So all of this is still extremely alive and active today. I started with this particular treaty and just a few words about other foundations, which I think still are very important. Probably the most important one was the border issue, the treaty signed in late 1990, so just before this Friendship and Partnership Treaty, which recognized the Oder-Neiße border as the state border. That was still actually legally an open question that had to be addressed finally after unification of Germany. And of course, you can imagine what kind of stability this final recognition of the border provided. So one doesn't speak about that so much anymore, but I was a young diplomat at the time, and I remember the discussion in Germany about this, and certainly the time was ripe to finally conclude this chapter and establish legal clarity, and therefore the basis for confidence, really, I would say, between our two peoples. Interestingly, in the same year, 1991, another important treaty was signed. The Weimar Triangle was founded. You probably have heard about this. It is Germany, Poland, and France who came together, the three foreign ministers in the city of Weimar in Germany, to create a special kind of cooperation. You might liken it to the Visegrad cooperation, so a small group of countries come together and express a strong interest to cooperate in the future. And for us in Germany, I would say this was a very important leap, because West Germany was used to cooperate very closely with France after World War II, and really in terms of European initiatives, but also all sorts of bilateral connections. And from our point of view, now the time was right to extend this to Poland and really create or work towards a relationship between Germany, France, and Germany, Poland that would be on an equal footing. Of course, that was more a vision at the time, 30 years ago, and the Weimar Triangle was a symbolic move to express this desire and this vision. And again, I would say this still plays a very important role for us today, especially when it comes to Europe, to the European Union, and common initiatives for the future of the European Union. And just to conclude this first chapter on foundations, I think really to go back a little bit further, I would highlight reconciliation steps that were extremely important for our two countries. The main and earliest one came from Poland, was the letter of the bishops sent to their bishop colleagues, I don't know if you can say that, in Germany in 1965, giving pardon and asking for pardon, and there was a letter of reply from the German bishops after that. And another very important reconciliation step was the famous kneeling of Chancellor Willy Brandt in 1970 when he visited the Warsaw Ghetto Memorial, an iconic picture for us, symbolizing the feeling of a German chancellor in the face of the huge guilt and shame that he felt, and he describes it actually in his biography that this was a spontaneous gesture, and he said, when words fail, that's all I can do. So a very powerful, iconic moment, and maybe another one was the reconciliation mass that was celebrated by Chancellor Kohl and Prime Minister Mazowiecki in 1989. So this, I think, are important elements and steps that are still very valid today and have created a very strong foundation for our relationship. Now, where are we now? I would maybe distinguish where are we now with respect to 30 years ago, so to highlight the road we have traveled in between, and then exactly what issues are on our minds right now today, and then we come to the more current issues that will probably be what we will discuss with you a little bit later. So first of all, if we take a more long-term view, 30 years ago, Poland was not in the European Union. It was a relatively poor country. Relations were very sparse, of course, because of the border before, and now. Just a few numbers. We have, I think it's always incredible to understand that more than 3 million young people have actually met through this Deutsch-Polnische Jugendwerk, through the youth organization. So they have been very, very active. This is not so well known. It's really grassroots activities. But it's extremely important. What you read in the papers is when presidents shake hands or so, but to understand the dimension of young people's exchanges, schools and then universities and through all kinds of ways is really an enormous number. And I forgot to say that these institutions have been in principle modeled on German-French experience, where we also have youth exchange and various vehicles for cooperation. Another very strong bond is city or town twinnings. Here we have more than 400 between Poland and Germany, so it's also a huge number. And wherever I have been in the past year, I've asked mayors in Poland about this, and they have always told me how incredibly alive this kind of relationship is. And maybe I can cite one example that has really touched me, which is completely unknown, at least for all the people I've spoken with. I went to the city of Wielun this year, where the German Luftwaffe, the German Nazi Luftwaffe, bombarded this town on the very first day of World War II, and killed hundreds of completely innocent people. It was not a military fight at all. It was just terror. It was a signal to terrorize the Polish population on the very first day. And also it showed the completely different nature of the war here in Poland compared to the war in France, for instance, before. And here there's a city twinning between the town of Wielun and a German town in Sachsen-Anhalt. And every day, every year, young people from both cities come together and organize a commemoration march that goes from Gliwice to Wielun, which was the way the Luftwaffe went at the time. So there are things like that are extremely powerful. Civil society, not even known, that I think are good, that mirror well the confidence that has built up between our our two countries. I'm also going to say some more difficult and critical things, but I wanted to start with these reconciliation steps because sometimes they are not so well known. And also, when we talk about the 30 years, I think one of the strongest expressions of the way our relationship has expanded is the state of the economy, of course. Germany is the most important trading partner for Poland, and Poland is the fifth most important trading partner for Germany, which is also absolutely incredible. So we have the US, France, China, the Netherlands because of the port of Rotterdam, and then Poland. So Poland has surpassed, for instance, Italy or UK, very, very important traditional economic and trading partners for us. This is fairly recent, and the trend is still going up. So, and also, there are about, I'm saying this here in the University of Economics, also about 6,000 German companies are represented in Poland, and 1,000 Polish companies are represented in Germany, and that's really great. So this relationship is becoming less asymmetric and more on a par, which is really the way it should be going. And we will do everything to promote this overcoming of the asymmetry. So I think this is also a very, very positive long-term development. And when we look at many of the critical issues that we discussed today, we should not forget these strong foundations. That's really why I wanted to start with this. Now, I would say between our governments in recent years, in many ways we cooperate well, but of course politically we are they're also not in the same party groups in the European Parliament. For instance, there are many views that are somewhat distant from each other. And so there are some controversial issues that are related to that, and probably some controversial issues that would happen anyway between our two governments, our two countries at the moment. And it seems to me, or that was my very strong impression right from the start, that Poland is a country that is politically and quite divided, even polarized in many ways. And this is also the case in the Polish society. That's my observation, but it's shared by many and by most Poles I've spoken to. There are these discrepancies between East and West, and old and young, and cities and villages, of course. And I would say also vis-à-vis Germany. So there are many people look at Germany in an extremely positive and open way, but many don't, and see or look at Germany in a critical way for a number of reasons. I think that has a lot to do with history, of course, and who can blame them after 4 horrible partitions in the past. So obviously this is a very, very heavy load that still wears on the people in Poland. So we must understand this in every way, emotionally. There are some thorny issues that play a role today. Let me just give you a few examples. One is of course Nord Stream 2. This is an issue that is not at all related specifically to this Polish government, but it is more or less shared by almost all Poles I have spoken to, the critical view of this German-Russian project. And there we simply have very different views on either side. I would add that it's not uncontroversial in Germany, although it has been a majority view. It has been promoted by the Social Democratic Party and also the Christian Democratic Party, supported by Chancellor Merkel as well. And now the building is actually finished. Next steps will be licensing and then the actual usage of this. We now have a new government in formation. And within that government, there are controversial views about Nord Stream. So we will see how that discussion will play out, and I have no idea. It'll be part of the coalition negotiations that are happening right now. I think when one views this project from the outside, one thing that needs to be borne in mind is that we have launched an energy transformation 20 years ago, and one complete difference between our discussion and the discussion in Poland is the rejection of nuclear energy by the German population. I think it was 90% or so of our population has been and still is against nuclear energy. Now, like it or not, that's a political fact. So our governments have drawn the consequences, and we are shutting down the final nuclear power stations next year. And the ambition is to go towards renewable energies as fast as possible. But everybody would say we need a bridging technology because of the fluctuations of renewable energies and technology, and many challenges have not been met. So probably the answer to that in Poland will be the construction of nuclear energy, like in France or some other countries. That is politically impossible in Germany. So we need gas for that. The question is where will it come from? But I think that needs to be borne in mind. I only wanted to make this point. Another issue that is actually difficult in our government-to-government relations is connected to the minorities. I mentioned that before. The important passages on the minorities in the Treaty of Partnership and Friendship. And what we have a problem with certain reforms in Poland that leads to basically almost a halving of the tuition provided to the German minority here in Poland. It's technically a bit complicated, but that's the net result of it. And Polish government is complaining that the Polonia minority is not receiving enough funding for language tuition. We have arguments about the statistics, and I think with goodwill we can probably make some better progress, but it's actually an issue not so much in the press, but quite a lot in our G2G, or government-to-government relations. And of course this is all about people, so it's emotional, it's not an abstract issue. Then the issue of dealing with history of, as I said before, the German guilt and the monstrosity of what Germans did here, especially during the Nazi period, is still very much on people's minds. And I think in Germany too, of course, it plays a big role in our education, and we all have been brought up with this. We have argued with our parents and maybe grandparents about guilt issues and so on. But here there are some specific issues, and one is, and there I actually have a lot of sympathy for myself, that I did not realize that we look in some ways in a selective way at the Nazi period here in Poland. I think for us the Holocaust is the overriding theme, exemplified by the concentration camp in Auschwitz. But I have now understood much more myself, and I make this personally, that there really are some white spots or white areas in our German recollection of that period. And here again, I want to cite an example. 2 days ago, on the way to Krakow from Warsaw, we visited an excellent new museum in Michniów, which was a village destroyed, completely destroyed by German police actually, in 1943. And there's a new museum that commemorates not only Michniów, but 817 villages that were completely destroyed, meaning most of the inhabitants, children, women, elderly people, shot and killed or burnt alive, basically. Mainly to do with partisan issues and an act of terror, really. But this is something I would say only very few experts know in Germany. There are villages like Lidice in the Czech Republic or Oradour-sur-Glane in France. Probably you don't know about that, but these names are known. But here we have more than 800 such villages, and that the whole story is not known. So this is something to deal with, and I think it's an act of historical fairness to the victims to talk about that and to commemorate them. And a second example I would like to cite is the extermination of Polish elites, especially in the early months and years of the occupation. And to my I did not expect that the name of Katyn, where the Soviet Red Army killed many thousands of the Polish military elite. This is quite known in Germany, but all the places where we killed not military but political and other elites are not so well known. So this is actually unbelievable, I think. And when this is criticized from this government or from whoever in Poland, I think they really have a point, and we need to look at this, and I have an idea how we can do that a little bit later. And then there's the issue of reparations, which is brought up time and again by this government. Here, Germany has a very strong, very principled legal position that the issue of reparations is closed because there are a number of times the Polish governments from the 50s and until the early 90s have concluded that this is no longer an issue. But it is a topic that is brought up time and again by the government, and apparently, according to the press, there will even be a new institute that will look into this issue in the future. And then I would say there are some bilateral issues. All of these were bilateral issues, more or less. I think the most important and most difficult issue we have at the moment is over the rule of law in Europe, and specifically that's not a bilateral issue. But our position is we support the European institutions, the Commission and the European Court of Justice, because it is their job to watch over European law and also to interpret European law, and this is really the foundation and the glue of the European construction, the respect for European law, and now we are entering here into a very difficult area, I think a very difficult legal area, because with Poland there are not only individual issues of discrepancy like the existence of the disciplinary chamber, but for the first time, at least to my knowledge, a country has rejected the notion of legal supremacy for entire areas of the law, in this case the organization of justice here in Poland. And I think this is really opening up a very difficult chapter that will also be difficult in bilateral relations. But again, I see this as an issue between the European institutions and Poland. And yeah, maybe so much about that. And then my final comments are about where do we go from here. First of all, we will have a new government in Germany. We call it the traffic light coalition. This is very likely. They're in coalition talks at the moment, be headed by the Social Democrat Olaf Scholz, who is now our finance minister, and then the Green Party and the Liberal Party. It's quite a mixed bag, so it's not easy to find compromises, but clearly all of them want it, and they have been preparing for it. And I think everybody expects these coalition talks to go much better than 4 years ago when a complex three-party coalition was underway, and then in the end it fell apart. So this time it will work, and we will probably have a new government in the first week of November. And the question is, how will they look at Poland? What does that mean for Poland? Honestly, it's not easy to say that right now, because they will have to negotiate these issues. And in general, foreign policy is not, unfortunately, I would say, not one of the most important areas they have been looking at, and it played almost no role in our election campaign, for instance. So what it means for Poland, for a specific country, really remains to be seen. I mean, Nord Stream I already mentioned. It's that's one area where we have controversial positions. Actually, the Greens and the Liberals are very critical and have been of Nord Stream, but the SPD, of course, they started it for them. They are very committed to it. So what comes out of it, we will have to see. I would expect all three parties to be very concerned about the rule of law issue in general, including in Poland and in Hungary. So that will certainly be one of the more difficult issues between us. What I'm concerned about is that, not so much concerned about is if we have, controversial issues, because we have that with France too, or with the US, with every country in a way. But the more important question is, how do we deal with them? Do we just kind of criticize each other, or do we find civilized ways of conducting a dialogue and reaching compromises here? And I think, unfortunately, in the past few years, the intensity and quality of political dialogue has declined, and that's what I'm really concerned about. And here there's no, I would not say one side is wrong or guilty of this somehow. This has happened for a number of reasons, of course, for the pandemic more recently, but it's more serious than that. So that's what, at least we are advising the next government to really make a point about re-intensifying political dialogue, government-to-government consultations and parliamentary consultations and so on, and discuss these difficult issues directly with each other. that I mean, it seems obvious, but it hasn't been obvious for a while, and this I think is extremely important, and also continue civil society and engagement, which I think is basically in a good state, but the more of that, especially also young people, we can do to further our understanding is great. And then some of the opportunities that you mentioned in the beginning. To give you another example, I think I see that Poland is also committed to fighting climate change today in a different way, but there's some areas like wind energy where I think we can have a wonderful area of cooperation in the future. Of course, the Baltic coast is ideally suited for this type of renewable energy, and our government and our companies are very interested to cooperate with their counterparts on the Polish side to explore this area, and we have had some very good meetings with the Ministry and the Minister of Climate here and with Polish companies. So this could be a success story, a win-win story in the future, if we only develop that. Science and research, technology. Actually, wherever I have been, I've heard very good things about excellent cooperation between Polish and German universities and institutions. So this has a good tradition and is obviously growing at the moment. We see a much stronger involvement of basic research and applied research. That's Max Planck Institutes in Germany. We have 5 new cooperation schemes. They're called Dioscuri, between German and Polish institutes, and there probably will be 10 soon. And a similar organization on our side is called Fraunhofer Society. They deal not with basic research, but with applied research, so research that is closer to companies and entrepreneurs, and they're also very interested, basically not to look only west, as they have done in the future, but see tremendous opportunities in Poland, also in the Czech Republic, where I was ambassador before, and so there's something changing for the better on our side, and I think this is really a great opportunity for our two countries to explore. And then finally to end with history again, there is one very important new project in Berlin. A new monument will be created to commemorate the Polish victims of the German Nazi occupation period. This is new in the sense that we have a number of memorials for groups of people like Jews or Sinti and Roma or homosexuals, but this is the first time that victims of one country are singled out, obviously because we feel that the atrocities were particularly horrible here in Poland, and we're at the moment in the process of developing a concept for this new monument, and it will be a proper monument where you can lay a wreath, but also a place to meet and to educate people and to discuss certain things. And that's, I think, where these issues, which I call the white spots or blank spots, belong. Yeah? So I would hope that issues like, extermination of elites here and villages and all these extremely difficult areas will be presented and discussed. So thank you very much. I think I'll leave it at that. And
So thank you very much for your very vivid and interesting and stimulating speech. I think that what is important, message flowing from your speech is that we must think the past, but at the same time we need to think about the future. In your presentation you pointed out to some areas for cooperation, and I do believe that the places like university is the best place to start, a starting point for such discussion. So, dear participants, it's time for discussion, it's time to make comments, so everyone is welcome to comment and to put a question to our honorable guest. Who would like to start? Yeah, Dr. Marcin Kędzierski.
Hello, Ambassador. Vielen Dank für Ihre Rede. I would like to make one comment and one question. According to the comment, when I talk to my German colleagues from German political foundations, I think that there was a concept that the good economic relations between Poland and Germany are strongly interconnected with the political relations. And that is why when the political relations went to some troubles after 2015, there were some trials of Chancellor Angela Merkel to fix them. And that is how I understand her visit to Warsaw in 2016, and then the visits from Prime Minister Morawiecki in 2017 in Berlin. But finally, somehow around 2018, I think that the German elites understood that the bad political relations between Poland and Germany do not affect or don't have the negative effect on the economic relations, because they are, prospering. And I think that the interest of German elites, political elites, academic elites in Poland and in strengthening the bilateral relations, political relations, some cultural relations, is diminishing, because there is a raising awareness that our economy is dependent on the German economy. We are so strongly dependent economically that there is no need to fix the political relations. And according to the question, the major issue now in the European Union is the open strategic autonomy. And there are coming big questions for the future of the European Union. And as we already know, that most of the German branches have problems with shortages of chips. And there is a problem for whole European economy. And we know that Chancellor Merkel actually tied very strongly German and Chinese economy within the last period. And there is as we used to have the so-called German question in Europe, now we have the Chinese question, and how will be the stance of the new German government towards China. And the second question, according to the open strategic autonomy, is that is your field of expertise. What is the potential perspective for NATO, especially after the recent development or establishment of AUKUS? Thank you very much. The AUKUS, the establishment of the cooperation between Australia, UK, and US. And so what is your stance towards the potential perspectives for NATO? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. Mr. Ambassador, would you be pleased to answer to this question?
Does it work? Does it work? Yes, I think so. Thank you very much. There was actually a lot of very strong, powerful questions in one. Maybe I can address them one by one. You said that there's an impression that the interest on the part of German elites in Poland is diminishing. I hear that often. I'm not sure that's the case, and I would be curious to find out what the basis for this claim is. I wouldn't rule it out, but I think it's very complicated. So in my experience, and I'm talking to a lot of people, I find some evidence for that, but also some evidence for the opposite. I think if one talks about the political elites, for instance, just look at the recent extremely high-ranking visitors we have had from Germany to Poland since June. So after the pandemic, we've had the federal president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, his predecessor, Joachim Gauck, the foreign minister, Mr. Laschet, who visited Poland on the 1st of August, the commemoration of the outbreak of the Warsaw Uprising. At that point, everybody expected him to become the next chancellor. He made a strong statement to come to Poland, and then the chancellor herself. I think only France had so many important visitors. So obviously, for politicians, Poland is more important than meets the eye, I would say. To some extent because relations are more difficult now, but I think even without that, in former times, that was the case. I remember one of the former foreign ministers, Guido Westerwelle, 10 years ago, on his very first day in office, he traveled to Poland. Normally, foreign minister goes to Paris on the very first day, so he chose Warsaw. So, okay, that's 10 years ago. That was before the peace government, obviously, but I think the interest is still there. I mean, I think the interest in cooperation with France is stronger and always has been stronger and probably will remain stronger. But Poland is our number 2 country partner here in Germany. And of course, we feel that there are particularly issues about the future of Europe and the legal base in Europe that absolutely need to be discussed. So I would not predict that the interest in this is going down. Yeah? And on the level of society, as I said, I'm not so sure, but I'm just not sure. There needs to be evidence for this. So China, I think that would be a very, very interesting and important issue for the new government. Yeah? I would not say that our previous government has made China the object of a very thorough strategic debate. But obviously this is now in the air for economic reasons and also for geopolitical reasons, future of NATO, wherever you look. I mean, and of course a lot will depend on Germany's point of view. We have been traditionally very strongly involved in economic relations with China, and the Chancellor Merkel was of this opinion, and one reflection was of course this EU-China agreement that was signed, I think on the 30th of December, basically the last day of our EU presidency. But I wonder what the next government will think about this, and I think it will partly depend on who will get the foreign ministry. And here I cannot make a prediction really, but certainly some of the new forces, the Greens and the Liberals, I think they are probably more interested in a different balance between economic interest and geopolitical considerations there. So here I think a new and more thorough debate will ensue that is probably not only determined by economic factors. Yeah, the future of NATO. As you mentioned, I spent 3 years at NATO. My job was one of the assistant secretaries general, so it's basically like a head of division. There's a secretary general, the deputy secretary general, and then 8 heads of division. My area was intelligence, so that was the analysis of the threats for NATO, but of course I was on the board, so we were discussing the challenges NATO, and even a couple of years ago one could see China rising as an issue that came mainly from the US side, and the discussion we have at the moment about the new strategic concept in NATO is partly about which role China will play in the future of NATO. It played basically no role until 5 years ago, and with the present mindset of the US, the pivot to Asia, this will be much more strongly reflected in the threat perspective, but also in partnerships. So you mentioned AUKUS, so I think I would also expect reaching out to partners in the Pacific, not only the US, but also NATO, Australia, Japan, Korea, New Zealand, and so on. But the whole issue will be about the balance, and how important will Asia be, and how important will the challenges in the periphery of Europe will be. And this is actually an issue, I would say, where Germany and Poland have very similar interests. We think that NATO should focus also in the future on our regional periphery, very much so.
So thank you very much for your response to the question. Another one? Yes, please. Kuba Głowacki.
Hello, thank you for your very interesting and inspirational lecture. I have a question concerning the place of Poland in European Union. As you said at the beginning of your lecture, Germany gave big support for Poland in the process of accessing Poland to EU. And you mentioned also about that your European Commission raised some penalties for Polish justice system and also for mine to roof. So in this context, how you assess the possibility of Polexit in near future? I realize that it's a quite difficult question, but I would like to ask you for your personal comment. Thank you.
Hard question.
No, that's actually an easy question in a way, the way you phrased it. So I think personally, and also in my capacity as ambassador, that would be a complete catastrophe. We also thought that Brexit was a catastrophe, but a Polexit would be far worse than that in every way. I do not believe, at least so far, that this is a real danger, because it seems to me, after all, in Poland, something like 88% of the population is pro-European Union. So which government can, make a step against such an overwhelming majority, first of all? And secondly, the European funds are extremely important for this country, but also for any government of this country. So if you want to win an election, it would be very problematic to lose out on so much money. So I cannot really see the incentive to go towards a Polexit. In the long term, I have no idea. I mean, for instance, I think when Poland will stop being a net recipient of European funds, then you are in a completely different ballgame. But that will not happen for 10 years or so at least. So this is certainly not imminent. And then, of course, I mean, geopolitical reasons would very, very strongly argue against Poland leaving the European Union, because you would lose the protection of this institution against your eastern neighbor, and really weaken Poland strategically in every way. So I cannot understand how that can be a genuine interest. That's the easy answer. The more difficult one is how to deal with such a fundamental disagreement as we now have on the rule of law in the EU. And I think Poland has now opened up the most difficult chapter I can think of on the rule of law in European history, and actually, yeah, because it's not only a single issue that can then somehow be solved, like Turów or the disciplinary chamber or so, but if one rejects the supremacy of the EU for whole areas, maybe there will be other areas in the future. That is a huge challenge.
Thank you. Please. Please introduce yourself.
Karol Wałachowski, Krakow University of Economics. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for your very interesting lecture. I would like to ask the question about the approach to public debt in Germany nowadays, because mainly from historical reasons, I can imagine that the Germans have very negative approach to public debt. From historical reasons. And nowadays, during the COVID-19 era, the countries are making their debts very high. We are facing, maybe it's very controversial, but we are facing the wartime economy in many countries. The public debt in Eurozone has increased in last months. It's around 100 GDP. The situation in the United States is worse, etc., etc. And have you noticed that the approach to that has changed in Germany, or in the next few years we will face that Germany will do something to make this debt less huge? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. That's one of the most controversial issues to be discussed by the future coalition partners, and also such was the case in the old coalitions, of course. So the the recovery fund that was suggested by Germany and France and based on a common European debt was seen as an exception by Chancellor Merkel and her party, and probably by large parts of the Social Democratic Party as a first step towards mutualization of debt in other areas in the Eurozone as well. This is an old debate we've had. It was very hotly debated during the Eurozone crisis 10 years ago, but since Merkel was always in government, she firmly rejected this. So what will we get in the next coalition? We will have Olaf Scholz, who is in favor of using this mechanism as well in a broader sense, but and the Green Party is also open to this, but the Liberal Party, the Freie Demokratische Partei, is strongly opposed to this, and they will. At least they aspire to get the finance ministry, and I think this is one of the issues where they will say, over my dead body, and that is completely anathema to the Liberal Party. So, so you have a collision of strong views about this, and I can, at best, I would expect further compromises, but I would not expect that this is the first step towards a wider mutualization of debts by the next German government.
Thank you. Another question? Please, go ahead.
Władysław Pęksa, Law Institute. I have two short questions. Thank you for the very inspirative speech. But I would like to ask about the German position in the European Union and the perspective of Germany.
European Union?
In the European Union.
Yeah.
First, concerning the Western Balkans. 20 years ago, European Union practically delivered the stability in this region. And nowadays, the European public opinion mood about the making European Union wider is probably very negative. So what is the future of the Western Balkans from this perspective? And the second question, as I remember, President Emmanuel Macron, preparing the French presidency in the European Union, made the reform of the European Union as a part of his agenda. What is your perspective and approach to this question? Thank you.
The first question is easier to answer than the second. Now, on Western Balkans, it seems to me that we have been, strongly advocating in favor of, leading towards an accession of the Western Balkan countries, like Poland, over the years. And the Balkans wars and Kosovo, they were extremely hotly debated in Germany at the time. We are quite close to that region. It was the first time that a German government actually went to war since 1945. So politically an incredible step for us. But there was a lot of compassion for the victims of Mr. Milosevic in Bosnia and so on. So the mood, I would say, is still broadly in favor of this accession process, rather like in Poland. And this has been one of the foreign policy issues where we have cooperated well and still are cooperating well. There's a so-called Berlin process, which Mrs. Merkel started at one point. The trouble is, of course, that other European countries are strongly opposed to that now, but we are in the camp, in the same camp as you, by and large, and I cannot see that the future German government will change its position. None of them has a different view on this. So that's the easier and it's easy and good news. On European reform, that will be very difficult. So I must say, probably Mrs. Merkel, she is seen very widely as a formidable problem solver, but probably less as a visionary for the future of Europe, rather like Macron, for instance. And of course, the former government did not really have a strong vision how to reform the European Union, except for in certain ways or as a reaction to crises usually. So our positions have evolved through crisis management and not so much a vision, a strategic vision for the future of Europe. I would personally hope that the next government will really look into this and develop a comprehensive vision on the future of Europe. It's not a super state. I mean, sometimes in Poland there's a caricature of, including the German position, that we would allegedly want a European superstate. That's really not true. Has never been the case, because from our point of view, the issue of subsidiarity, that always do things at a lower level if they can be done better at a lower level, that has been a guiding principle for us as well. Of course, there are some people who dream of a European superstate, but very, very few, and definitely fewer people now than before. And I think in our mindset, a federation, a federal state, as we have it in Germany, is quite a natural model. So we have mixed competences. Some are done at the federal level, some are done at the Länder level, and some are done at the community level or so. And that's probably how most Germans look at the European Union. So not a superstate in the sense of a centralized state, but a complicated mixture. And I think there's consensus about that. I think one issue where the new government will have a strong position is foreign policy. All three parties have spoken out in their party programs in favor of overcoming the veto in foreign policy, so -1 or qualified majority voting. However, difficult that will be to reach, but it's one strong position here. But there's no real vision of the future of the Eurozone, for instance, or of defense. That will probably come out in the next couple of weeks. We will see a bit clearer on this.
So thank you very much. Is there anyone who wishes to put a question? Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm a student of University of Economics, and I would like to ask a question about what is something what was mentioned before, which is whole energetic shift to green source of energy, and how it will impact German economy, because right now what it seems we stand on the edge of energetic crisis, at least in Poland, and shifting to reusable source of energy, which are unstable source of energy, might be very dangerous. And even though public opinion in Germany is against nuclear source of energy, shouldn't the new government at least postpone this transition to other source? Thank you.
So I would say that probably climate change is has been the overriding theme, or the single most important theme in our election campaign. Germans are very, very concerned about climate change, especially young people. That's what the statistics show, because obviously they will bear the brunt of this in their lifetime. And at the same time, there's almost a consensus against nuclear power. So the debate that is going on at the moment between the Green Party and the Liberal Party is very interesting. They're all committed to fight climate change, but in different ways. So the Liberal Party, of course, is emphasizing innovation, market forces, stimulating high tech to solve these issues, and the Green Party is more concerned with state regulation in many ways. And these are not fundamentally paradoxical, but of course it's quite difficult to reach compromises on these issues. But I'm sure that at the end of these coalition talks, a very powerful chapter will come out that will actually accelerate the fight against climate change in Germany. I think this government cannot present itself to voters without, being able to say that we are now, much more committed to finding climate change than the old government, which in this sense has disappointed many voters in Germany. Quite exactly where these issues will be remains to be seen. I mean, if you break this down, it gets very complicated. For instance, a speed limit on German motorways, that's what the Green Party would like to see. For some reason, my compatriots love the freedom of speeding on motorways. So the Liberal Party is dead against this and has already said that they will not go down this way. But I think there will have to be some very strong push towards greater innovation to solve the the technical and also economic challenges of energy transformation. Yeah, the fluctuations of natural renewables, the storage issues, hydrogen, and so on. I think that will probably, these issues will be the focus of our future government.
Thank you very much. There's only room for one question, short question. Yeah, please, David.
Hello, thank you for visiting us. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm British, one of the academics, not one of the Brexiteers. I decided to stay in Poland. Moving on to the issue of security, we've seen quite a lot of instability on NATO's east flank over a number of years. In parallel, we're observing, a very strong Russian-Chinese strategic partnership which spans area of politics, strong economic cooperation, military cooperation. And it brings me round to one central question. We're living in a pretty unstable world at the moment. We're searching for answers to European stability, not just the European Union. And perhaps my question is, how important in the future, moving forward, is it to engage our Russian partners and to ask them to sort of also share and join us in sort of making Europe a much more stable and peaceful place for all of us to live in? Thank you.
My former boss, Jens Stoltenberg at NATO, he always used to say, we are ready to negotiate, but from a position of strength. And for me, that's a very nice, easy way to sum up what NATO has stood for since the Hamel double-track decision in 1968, and still is by and large. There's constant arguing between member states about dialogue with Russia and deterrence on the other side, and of course what deterrence means today, because the nature of of all threats are no longer purely military, but they're much more complex now. Hybrid warfare, cyber attacks, critical infrastructure, space, and so on and so forth. So NATO is adapting to encompass all these new elements in its new strategy at the moment, but always balancing it with an offer to engage in dialogue with Russia. This is actually an area where Germany and Poland are not seeing eye to eye. We have always emphasized the necessity or importance of dialogue from our point of view, but mind you, from a position of strength, so not only dialogue, but also deterrence, very, very, very clearly, whereas Poland tends to downplay the importance of dialogue from our point of view. It does get more and more complicated with Russia, because Russia has just closed its mission to NATO, as I'm sure you have seen. It closed it altogether. This does not preclude future dialogue, but it will make it much more difficult in the future. But I personally, I firmly believe in this kind of dual principle, deterrence and dialogue, and I think I'm sure that our future German government will also be on work on this principle too.
Thank you. Such information is that the lack of time prevents us for continuation of this discussing. So I would like firstly thank you everyone for being here today. My special thanks goes to Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Ambassador, it was a very fascinating, inspiring lecture, and the number of questions is a proof for that. And please give a round of applause to Her Excellency, Mr. Ambassador Arndt Freytag von Loringhoven. Please. And before I will close this meeting, I would like to share with you a piece of information that this debate was the first debate within the framework of special meetings which we called Rector's Debate. And it was a great privilege that Mr. Ambassador was the first speaker within this series. But I also would like to inform you that on November, I guess, 26, another important and very prominent speaker will guest here and will provide a lecture. This time it's going to be the Secretary General of OECDC, who asked us to organize such meeting, and we are very pleased, of course, to welcome him. So please feel, informed, but, on the following days, we'll distribute relevant information. Of course, we will be warmly welcome at this meeting. Thank you very much, and have a good day.